This is the Doing Scary Things podcast. I'm Katie. I'm a veteran photographer, a serial entrepreneur, an aspiring author, and a relentless optimist. I'm a slow-talking, deep thinker from the Appalachian Mountains.
I'm Anna. I'm a prodigal musician, an accidental psychotherapist, and I'm living life mostly by experiment and endless curiosity. I'm a redheaded speed talker from a Midwestern farm town.
The purpose of this podcast is to talk to people who are doing some pretty scary things in their life about what it takes for them to push past fear and keep themselves going every day.
We'll also unpack the vulnerable things we're pursuing in our own lives and hopefully offer encouragement to you wherever you are on your journey.
Man, that was brilliant.
Hi, friends, and other people we don't know yet.
Yet to be friends.
Yes.
Future friends.
Future friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoy this topic. It's something we're pretty passionate about.
Yeah, we've been talking about it a good deal lately because we've had our own personal experiences with it. Surprise. We're running into this thing sometimes where we see pushback to people who are doing scary things. And it's
not cool.
It's kind of maybe a knee-jerk human being kind of reaction, but it's not very helpful. But it just feels like people are trying to be exclusive. They're trying to say, oh, these other people aren't good enough or can't sit with us or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
It's like that whole feeling. And so we've kind of been talking about this off mic, just because we're wondering, like, is this an everybody situation? Is this an artist attitude that's circulating around? Is it pervasive in other fields too? You know, what is this thing about? Like, what is this sense of exclusivity doing? How is it serving us or trying to?
Yeah. And I want to be as specific as possible. So just as an example, things were overheard at a party, let's say, basically about a musician's ability and history of experience. It really struck me as interesting because the person that was basically calling the other person out and saying, oh, I don't think you have as much experience as me. I was reading between the lines, but that's basically what they were getting at. You don't have enough experience to call yourself a musician. But what was fascinating was that person wasn't asking the other person any details about their life. Right. And it was very obvious to me that the two didn't know each other.
Yeah. They hear one thing about the other person and decide what all of it must be about for them, or...
Yeah. And as observers of life, you know, obviously this has come up a time or two.
Yeah.
So I literally came to Anna and I said, is this just in music? Is this just in photography? Or are there other careers? Like, do people feel this in all careers? Is there this need to protect your experience? I have paid my dues. I have earned my place. Nobody else will ever be as qualified as me. You know, what is that? And is it across the board? So I brought that question to you.
Yeah.
And we just started dissecting it.
We did. And it's interesting because it feels like it's about respect and how respect has to be earned. And I don't disagree with that as a general principle, but I think when we have a very short list of how respect can be earned and how it has to fit in a certain box, or you're not valid in my eyes, your path has to look like my path, or it doesn't count. Like, that's very problematic.
Yeah. It reminded me of something we talked about on the Jason Wilkes episode when he was saying, okay, if I was going to go to med school, I would be putting in my time. You know, I'm starting school. I have this path planned out, and then I get out and I get this certification, right? Or I get this job title, or just frankly job.
Yeah.
And that is different in artistic careers. When do you get to call yourself a writer? When do you get to call yourself a photographer? When do you have the audacity to say, I'm a musician, you know? But I got to thinking, okay, so let's say two doctors have been in the profession for 20 years. Do we have a right to, or even a way to judge them against each other?
Right.
You know?
Like, who's the better or like most qualified or most doctory?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, and sure, there are ways to do that, but it's always going to be subjective. Maybe this person's bedside manner has made me feel better, so I like them. I read
Right.
some reviews online about this other person, so I like them. It's just so subjective.
Like you're saying, everybody's path is unique, but that's largely because everybody is unique and there's sort of pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses. And if you think that you are sort of wise or all-knowing enough to judge that about another person without really even knowing them, you're probably wrong.
Yeah.
And like, I'm telling you that to help you out if that's you, because you're probably going through life thinking that you've got everybody pegged when you don't. And, you said something really interesting, I think really compelling when we were talking about this just among ourselves. But you said, you can't discount another person's story when you don't even know it. Mm-hmm. And, that's what you were observing, was that the evaluations or the comparisons that were being made were kind of meaningless, except for probably made the musician feel really bad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The beginner.
Yeah.
And so that was another question I brought to you, is like, where does that come from? Why is it that just because I have paid my dues, I want to like make other people suffer? If somebody else could find a quicker way to get there, why wouldn't I be happy for them, first of all? Where does that come from? And what is that saying about that person?
Basically, like you're saying, sometimes there's clear sort of benchmarks, right? There's clear like qualifications or credentials or whatever. And to a point, that is a basis for an objective comparison. Whatever in our own conception of things means that, yes, now we can call ourselves a writer. Now we can call ourselves a musician. We can call ourselves a good doctor. We are confident that we're doing a good job. Like whatever goals or criteria we're using, those should be used for personal use only and not applied to other people from the outside to judge if they're good or if they're worthy. That's not what those are for. Not that we can't make evaluations. It's just that
they're not helpful.
Yeah, they're not helpful when they're applied the wrong way. Like, if we have them for personal use, that's great. But what you're talking about is that people do apply them to other people instead of just to use them for their own progress. And the psychology side of that, in my mind, is really about how people are very threatened when they see other people succeeding or pursuing something, even not succeeding, right, by their standards, but succeeding or pursuing something, and they're not doing it by the same means. They might feel like, well, I've paid my dues, but this other person hasn't, or has found some innovative way around that typical path that involves paying their dues. And that's when people really seem to have a hard time. I guess in my experience with people and what I've observed is that people being upset about that or feeling the need to judge other people on that basis is really because they feel threatened
or insecure
or invalidated, right? They're really worried about, well, if this person has, the same title as me, or they're in the same category as me and I don't think they're good enough, then people are going to think I'm not good enough. It's like very much about the critic instead of about the person that they're criticizing.
Absolutely. And where that all comes back to exclusivity is it's sort of like we have this innate belief that, there's only room for so many people.
Right.
And so it's like this constant competition.
Yeah. And for a lot of us, I think we feel like, well, we worked really hard, to allow ourselves to identify as this or that, or call ourselves this or that, or get this or that job. And so that's why it's so threatening. It feels like, well, what if all of our hard work was kind of for nothing and you didn't actually have to do all of that,
Yeah. And that's also, again, you don't know the other person's story.
Right.
Because you're not thinking about, well, maybe they're working just as hard.
Right.
Maybe they do deserve it too. And maybe, they didn't start the same time I did.
Yeah.
But they could catch up.
That's right.
It's scary.
Ooh. So, yeah, this is also tied to the idea that there really is room for everyone. And it's really important for you, dear listener, to understand that, like, that's where we're coming from. we're coming from the belief that there truly is room for everyone. That can be really hard for some people to grasp, right? Because for some people, the rarity or the exclusivity factor is what gives them their value. And that is not how we see things at all. So how can it possibly be that there really is room for everyone?
I don't know. I don't have the answers.
I hate when I see this happening. It's really uncomfortable and sometimes even heartbreaking, right? To watch this unfold because it happens all the time. But I think it's such a worthwhile topic for us because I know I can at least speak for myself to say that I've been on both sides of that coin. You know, I've been the critic and I've also been the person feeling very criticized or judged by other people. And I mean, honestly, both sides of the coin feel gross.
Yeah. As we were talking about this, I started thinking back over the years of being a professional photographer because a lot of people have come to me over the years just for advice or saying that, you know, they're trying to get started and stuff like that. And, you know, my first reaction was, oh, wow, I hope I didn't make them feel this way. You know, I hope I was helpful to them. Because let's be honest, photography has just morphed into this situation where it's like anybody can call themselves a photographer.
Right.
And I actually had someone say that to me once when they asked what I did. I told them I was a photographer and they laughed and they said, oh yeah, everybody's a photographer, right? And I mean, that could have been hurtful, but it really was just
It's telling.
Yeah, it's so telling of the era we live in and just frankly what it is. And so my attitude towards that has always just been like, yeah, a lot of people are doing it. Yeah, that's kind of annoying. You know, yes, I've been pushed off a dance floor trying to take pictures of my clients doing a first dance by their uncle, who I guess thought they could document it better.
Oh my gosh.
You know, like there's a million things I could tell. But instead of just getting angry about those things, I just have to do my thing, right? I did work really hard to be here. I'm still working really hard. If somebody else is going to work equally as hard, they have every right to be here too. And it's not up to me to say I started sooner or I think I'm better or whatever. Like, I just see all of that as irrelevant. What I have told people who've come to me and said, you know, oh, I think I would really enjoy doing photography. My main advice is you're going to have to work really hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to work really, really, really hard.
Right.
And I think if somebody was saying that to us about music, I think I would say valid.
Right.
Like, I get it, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before too, just kind of in the world of overnight successes, quote unquote. It's actually really helpful. Like, that's one really productive way that you could respond to someone and say, okay, let me help you have a realistic expectation. Yeah. Because I have been there and I have paid my dues and, you know, that's not for nothing.
Like, what's more helpful to say, statistically, chances are you might not make it, or to say, yep, you can do it. It's going to require a lot of hard work, you know?
Right.
And maybe that'll make that person decide not to start.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Maybe they thought it would be a fun hobby. But,
yeah,
you know, it's their right to decide.
Yeah.
And I feel like by being inclusive and accommodating and just frankly encouraging to other people, we let them have a part of their own story, you know, instead of just dictating, I don't think you're good enough. Well, frankly, I don't know what you're capable of.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that is an inside job. Everyone has to determine that for themselves. That reminds me too of something else from the Jason Wilkes episode where he was talking about, you know, basically it is a lot of work and it is grueling and it is scary. So if you don't have to do it with every fiber of your being, like, you don't just want to do it half-heartedly. Yeah. It's not for you if that's the case.
And maybe that's a little bit of where what we talked about in the beginning is coming from. You know, maybe people are almost looking down on people thinking, oh, like they have no idea how hard it is. And maybe that's fair. Maybe when you've lived through it and you know how hard it is, maybe it's fair to look at somebody and say, like, they don't know what they're in for. But let's take that, let's reframe it into a positive attitude and say, you know what? I'm just warning you. Like, it's going to be really hard, but you have the same capability that I have to try, to start, to do it. How can I help?
I think it's really cool that your reaction to people is like, how can I do something constructive in this moment instead of just cross my arms and roll my eyes at you? You're trying to, in some way, encourage them or even just help them set a realistic expectation. You're not withholding from them some kind of camaraderie or encouragement or even advice. You're like, okay, yeah, I'm going to trust that if there really is room for all of us, you believe that. So there's no harm, no foul in you being helpful, because if they're not gonna sort of stand the test of time, or they're not going to progress in this, parallel thing to what you're doing, like, that's gonna come out in the wash and you won't have to worry about it. Like, there's no reason it actually has to be a threat to you.
Yeah. And I think part of that for me was almost relief that I'm no longer in their shoes. And I mean that because it has been a tough road. And, it's like, yeah, I'm glad I don't have to do that again. I'm glad I don't have to start from scratch again. I'm glad I'm here. I'm not going to try to hold this over your head. Like, look at me, look how hard I've worked. It's like, I don't envy that you have this road ahead of you.
Right.
But if this is important to you, I know you can get there. The other part of that was every time I saw somebody coming out of the woodwork and seemingly being really good at the first day, again, overnight success. Like,
right.
we don't know people's stories. We only know what we see. The other side of that is anytime those undesirable emotions would start welling up in me of jealousy or comparison or what have you, this person, they haven't paid their dues like I have. Like, anytime that would start, I would think, you know what? This is what I believe. If I'm working as hard as I can, there's a place for me. And I believe that for myself and I believe it for them. Let's all work really hard. There's going to be room for everybody.
I think part of what can feel so gross on the critic side, like when you're being the critic, is just that it's like you're almost offended that somebody else is taking it for granted, or that somehow they're having success that they didn't have to work hard for. And
you have no idea how hard they've worked.
Exactly. Again, it's like you really, even if you think you know, you don't. Like, you can't, because you're not there all the time. Like, you have a bias. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with talking about, like, the feeling of comparison. Like, that's a visceral feeling. And where does that really get us when we're trying to do our own best and we're trying to live our own life on our own path? Like, it really doesn't serve us all that well. I think there is some flavor of comparison that's useful. Like, for example, if we're engaged in some comparison so that we can exchange, pro tips or something. Like, even if I'm way less experienced than you, and this is, me on day one, if you were to engage with me on like a helpful, encouraging level, you might even learn something from me.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a reason I seem like a natural on day one, and maybe it's something you've never considered. But you don't even get to find that out if you're busy judging,
Yeah, it's like that saying, if somebody says they have all the answers, like, don't trust them, you know? But it's like, and yet we're standing over here saying, well, I've done this for 10 years or 20 years or whatever, so I have nothing I can learn from you.
Yeah.
And no, we're two different people, two different experiences. Absolutely, I think it should be going both ways. You can both be learning from each other.
I think what's interesting too is that no matter who you are in terms of what side of the coin you're on in a given situation, if you're the critic or if you're the person being criticized, the antidote is really the same for both people. Reconnect with your sense of security. If you're just starting out, maybe it's your why. Maybe it's why this is so worth pursuing, even though maybe you do suck at it, or maybe people are giving you pushback. You're doing this for a reason, and it's part of a really important path in your life. And maybe if you are the person who's been doing it for 20 years and you're offended because this newbie hasn't paid their dues, like, then go back and be the one to value how you paid your dues and go back and reaffirm yourself. Like, that's right. I don't have to be threatened by this. I know that I'm valid because I have had all this experience and I am good and I do care about what I do. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it seems like it's insecurity on one side of the coin, trying to make the other side feel the same way.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And also just, maybe to take it a step back. Why do I feel this feeling?
Yes.
Why do I feel insecure suddenly? And then remind yourself, like you're saying, yeah, I have paid my dues. I have done this. They're not where I'm at. And I can rest, confidently in that.
Right.
Like, I have spent more time. And that doesn't devalue what they're doing and the experiences that they are currently having.
Right. I think it's interesting too, because sometimes I think people just get really comfortable and they get comfortable with, having their spot. This is my seat. This is my spot. And if somebody comes along and they feel like a threat to you, a lot of times I think that happens in the context of a situation where there's like finite number of spots on a certain team or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, here comes this new hot shot. And all of a sudden I feel like I got to make sure that my spot is secure. But I think there's also a world in which there is room for everyone, but maybe you're not going to be on this team forever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is room for you on a different team somewhere else, and maybe it's okay to entertain that too. You don't have to be threatened by a new person, even if in some functional, practical way, they really might actually replace you.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. And what's coming to my mind is the idea of healthy competition.
Yes.
Because like I was saying earlier, what I would always take from it, if I started feeling threatened or like, oh no, maybe they are better than me. And I mean, haven't I been doing this longer? Like, what does that mean? I would suggest going to the idea that, like, checking yourself. Are you doing everything you can do? Are you learning everything you can learn? Are you staying up to date with technology and changes in your profession? Are you working as hard as you can? Because if you're not, then maybe they do have the right to kind of pass you up, in the business world.
Right.
And so use that as a little healthy competition to say, you know what? There might be room for both of us. I hope there is. But I'm going to make sure I'm doing everything I can to stay at the top of my game.
Yeah.
So the other day when I was observing this conversation at this party, I thought about it a lot. And I was like, why does this sort of thing bother me? And I've thought about it a lot. I mean, it's one reason we started this podcast. It's part of our belief about creativity being inclusive. I started thinking, if we as society keep discouraging people from making art for whatever reason, we think, they don't have the right, they don't have the training, they're not as experienced as us. If we keep discouraging people from making art, one day there might not be any art. And that's a really scary thought.
Yeah.
And apply that across all boards, of course. I think that is one reason why it matters that we believe that there's room for everybody. We've all got to do our part to make this the best world it can be.
It's one thing to not to not judge or attack or discourage other people from doing what they're doing, whether it's art or something else, like you're saying, but it's another thing to actually welcome it, and I think that's a pressing thing that's on our hearts in this community, is that we really, we say the word encouragement a lot and we really do try to be encouraging, but yeah, it's like welcoming everyone to come out and be themselves and contribute and belong.
Yeah, because on a deeper level, it's like, what kind of world would this be if we only surrounded ourselves with people who thought the way we think? Like we would never learn new things, just like we were saying earlier. Like, this isn't Facebook, guys. But no, I think that gets us to sort of a dangerous place if we're never pushing ourselves to learn more and to grow more and to be the best we can be.
Yeah, even from potential competitors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let us know if you agree. Let us know if you disagree. doingscarythingspod@gmail.com.
If you just agree, we don't know what to do with you.
You're not allowed to agree. There's no room for greers.
Agreeers.
But we hope this has meant something to you. I hope it's made sense. And, let's continue the conversation. Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah.
For reals.
Thanks so much for joining us today. If you like what you've heard, take a second to subscribe or share it with a friend. There's plenty more information in our show notes, including a link to where you can listen to our music on Spotify. See you next week.
Thanks for pushing that button and downloading our podcast.
Shabam!